Welcome back. Previously, I've looked at what is potential, what is talent, what is competency, why use competency, what are the benefits of competencies. And before we took the break, we had looked at uh, example of competency framework, the name of the competency, the definition. We looked at the fact that for the same name, the indicators for competencies across the levels may be different. And we also looked at the fact that not all competencies are applicable at all levels. Some competencies may be applicable at senior level, some competencies may be applicable at junior level. However, there may be a few competencies which are organization-wide competencies which may be applicable across level. Now we will move on to a very interesting thing called as competency-based recruitment. Now, whenever we are doing selection, how do we measure the effectiveness of it? So there are basically three things that we look at. The first and the most important thing that we should look at and see is that can the person do the job, which is the competency. Second is the person can do the job, but will the person do the job, which is motivation. And third is the person may have a motivation, the person may have the competency, but will the person match with the organization culture, with the colleagues, with the salary, etc., which is will the person fit in. So that's how we look at the effectiveness of any selection process. In fact, we say performance is a function of competency, motivation, and also a lot of times the opportunities that a person gets. Competency, we are saying, is a function of CMO, competency, motivation, and opportunities. But this is my thing. Why do we use competencies for the purpose of recruitment and selection? So this is done to avoid square peg in round hole. I'll illustrate it. Let's assume this square is the job requirements and this circle is the person with competencies. If you were to have an intersection of it, the intersection is effectively used competencies. That part of the job which is not covered by the competencies of an individual is the job requirement which is not met. And that part of the person's competency which is not utilized in the job is unused competency. This is a resource which is wasted. Better the fit between the job and the person, greater is the efficiency from the job's perspective, and from an individual's perspective, it leads to increased job satisfaction. All these are copyrighted. So what is competency-based interview? The aim of competency-based interview is to use questions to find out how would a person approach problems, tasks, and challenges, and has the person used those specific competency skills in their previous experiences or jobs. So the aim is not to look at the right answer, but the aim is to look at the approach to solving problems. It is a lot of times also called as behavioral or situational interviewing. You wouldn't believe it. These are we have been doing work with clients, and these were some of the actual comments that we saw. She's an extrovert. He's shy. She's lazy, introvert, likable personality, sense of humor, very confident, self-motivated person. This person is impatient, and this last is judgment. He's good. Now tell me if this is the evidence that we have. It tells us nothing about a person. So these kind of comments need to be avoided actually. They are not linked to job in a way. We also need to understand that interview is not an interrogation. Interrogation is like, sometimes I've seen people saying, this person takes interviews. The way I took interview, the person started sweating and had to go to the washroom. Now, what's the point? Unless it's a stress interview, it serves no purpose. Some people like to speak for 80-85% of the time during interview. A good interview is like a conversation. You ask question. The aim is not to tell the candidate how much you know, but to find out how much does the candidate know. So remember, it isn't like an interrogation. And please, you need to avoid questions which make no sense. Like this boss asked the reportee, "Have you started working hard?" Now if the person says yes, so which means you were not working hard earlier. If the person says no, the boss will say, "Despite me telling you so many times, you still not started working hard." Or the other one, a nosy neighbor asking, "Has a spouse stopped beating you?" Now, what do you say? If you say no, which means you're still getting beaten. If you say yes, that means earlier you were getting beaten. Yeah. So remember, it should have and make some sense. So whenever we want to do competency based interviews, the first thing that we need to do is identify key competencies, behaviors, or attributes. Uh, Second is try and create a list of questions with both positive and negative aspects for each of the competency. Make sure that if you have a large panel and if you have multiple panels which are taking interviews, everybody asks similar kind of questions, and they also know what the rating scale is, because we have seen that if panels are not briefed, what happens is, on a 5 point scale, one panel will not give anybody more than 3.5, and the other panel will not give anybody less than 3.5. And then it becomes very difficult to compare candidates. So we need to ensure that everybody is at the same plane. And remember, we want to check and see what the candidate has done. So the focus is on I and not the royal we, with specific time and examples. You need to ensure, in fact, there's a terminology called as STAR, which is what was the situation, what was the task that was given to you, what action did you take, and what was the result. Remember, so it has to be all these things. And whenever we are taking interviews, we need to remember interviewing is all about probing. So there are two kinds of probes: open probe and closed probe. Like, if I were to ask you, uh, do you like this training or this session? This is a closed probe, and you can maybe give yes, no. So it's a closed probe. It has limited range of responses, and it will not tell. And if you have suppose said yes, or if you said no, I can be either happy, unhappy, but it will not tell me what made you happy, or what is it that you liked, or what is it that you did not like. However, an open probe uh, is one where you increase options. It helps to person to open up. So normally we say we use 5 W's and 1 H. Like, who all were there in your team? What was your role? When did this thing happen? Where did you go? And sometimes, why did you do it? And how much did you achieve? How much did you achieve? So these are probes. Normally, in a beginning of an interview, you start with open probe. Give me an example of a time when you had to deal with a group of people with whom you did not agree. So what was the situation? The person gives an answer. How did you go about working with them? What were some of the challenges that you faced? What was the outcome? So maybe the person shares a success story. Then you can actually turn around and say, give me a situation where you were not able to deal with people. What is it that came in your way of not able to do that? So have both positive as well as negative questions, and ensure that you have a complete situation, task, action, and result. And ensure that the person does not give you a vague or a hypothetical answer. And you also need to be aware that you don't ask a leading question. Like, uh, uh, I'm sure you will work hard. Now, which candidate will say in an interview, "No, sir, I will not work hard"? The most probable answer is, "Yes, sir, I will work hard. For me, work is worship." That kind of thing. So I'm sure at this stage you are comfortable about recruitment. We'll take